World War II, as we all know it, is a crucial part of our history and still affects us to this very day and age. Industries caused a vast change in the United States. Triumphant or tragic, these changes altered the industrial philosophy. World War II lasted between the dates of September 1st, 1939 and September 2nd, 1945. This began due to Germany invading Poland, which in turn made France and Britain declare war on Nazi Germany. America, however, did not fall into this war until December 7, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Industries before World War II had mainly men employees, made goods that benefited just the industry, and did not accept African American women into their system. Chicago during this time had various industrial plants all throughout the Chicagoland area. Such examples are Amertop Torpedo Ordnance Corporation in Forest Park, the assembly line in the Douglas Aircraft Plant in Park Ridge, and the biggest industrial plant in the world, the Dodge Chicago plant at 75th and Pulaski Road, are just a few to name. There were many other defense industries that appeared besides Chicago. In all, there were a total of 17 million civilian jobs that were created. Not surprisingly, the industrial productivity increased by 96%. Due to such high productivity, consumer goods were expanded even while the food rationing was occurring. During World War II, new opportunities for American women came along. They were able to enter into jobs that have never been open to them before, especially in the defense industry. This was a new experience for most of the women. This was a time where the typical depiction of a housewife was turned into a working-class citizen. Absentee rates were especially for women during this time. They would miss work to take care for their children. Eleanor Roosevelt demonstrated that if women are to be working while their children are at home, she stated that they must have a hot meal prepared for them to bring home to their families and daycare so that the small children do not have to be watched by the mothers all the time. By the summer of 1945, more than 1.5 million children would be in childcare programs. That isn't even the best part. This event was government funded and ran for 24 hours, 7 days a week, and ended when little boy was dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. Wages were not even throughout the beginning of the war, but as the war progressed, fairer incomes were brought into place. Union strength and savings had also increased. Fair may be a loose term, but going from World War I's industrial salary for men, which was $4.06 a week, and women $1.72 a week, to World War II's salary for $54.65 a week for men and $31.21 a week for women. During World War I, women were making 58% less than what the men were, but as World War II went on, women were making 43% less than the men. American industries during World War II were asked to perform beyond what was initially unprecedented. FDR asked for the production of 50,000 planes to be made in a year. Not only did the Americans achieve this goal, but by 1944, the country was producing 94,000 planes a year. Henry Kaiser, an industrialist who is known as the father of modern American shipbuilding, had a major growth of producing American ships. Before 1942, his shipyards were producing a ship every 365 days, and then at the peak of their time, Kaiser's shipyards were producing a ship a day. In the early years of the war, Franklin Roosevelt deliberately pursued a program to turn industry to wartime footing. Some instances began from lipstick cases becoming bomb cases, beer cans turned into hand grenades, vacuum cleaners as gas mask parks, and lingerie factories began making camouflage netting. There were a lot of planning and deliberating before these transitions of common goods were replaced by war materials. Even though FDR postponed shifting large consumer industries like the auto industry as long as possible, there was still a clear and conscious plan. Once the war was over, retransformation to civilian industry carried out after FDR's death in April 1945. Wartime alteration had many hardships. The majority of them resulted from too little planning to not at all. In 1942, the government finally forced the automobile industry to shift their plans to manufacture planes. There were 400,000 automobile workers that were thrown onto the streets until the war shift would take place, which resulted in auto dealers and salespersons to lose their jobs. Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady to FDR, had a disagreement with William Knudsen. a General Motors chairman, because he was unwilling to accept the government alternation. In the 1930s, there was a scarcity of jobs because many states passed laws excluding married women from working if their husbands already had a job. In the Kelsey-Hayes strike of 1941, the United Auto Workers UAW feared that hiring women for a man's job would lower the wage scale, so they went on strike. Eventually, women were needed to fill up the men's previous positions before they went to war. The UAW realized that the answer was equal pay for equal work. Unfortunately, the energy disappeared with the end of full employment at the end of the war. Women faced several challenges in order to overcome cultural stereotypes. African American women had the worst of this. They had endured anything from discrimination to lower wages. Not to mention that about a third of the women older than 14 years of age worked outside of their homes. They would receive 7 less shillings than the 21 shillings a week that men would get. Women would be actively deployed in civil defense schemes. Some were overnight fire watchers in factories, others were members of the military. Women were even at risk from bombing, but they were entitled to receive lower compensation for injuries compared to what men had. Some women parliamentarians, trade unions, and campaigners decided to take on this issue, and despite initial government opposition, equal pay rates were finally introduced in April 1943. At the same time this was occurring, Chicago Pile 1 was finished being built. TP-1 is a nuclear reactor that was started in 1939 at Columbia University but moved to University of Chicago for further experiments. Enrico Fermi was one of the main scientists working on this project. This was the first step towards the Manhattan Project. This was the research and development of the first nuclear weapon. Multiple industrial research labs were created to help in the development of atomic bombs. This was an enormous collaborative effort that was between the industrial, scientific sectors and the US government during World War II. Through the Manhattan Project, America was able to develop 2 atomic bombs, Little Boy and Fat Man, which were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan in 1945. Immense amounts of radiation from both of the bombs began to spread. The bombs caused air pollution, radioactive debris, damaged agricultural production, and much more. Deformities and mutations were caused by radiation. Some of the effects were rashes, sores, coughing or urinating blood, and hair loss. After World War II, women were laid off in large numbers because they were withholding the men from their rightful places in the industrial world. 75% of the women actually wanted to keep their jobs after World War II was finished, but were still laid off.
Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. We recognize the imperative need for this development. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
The American industrial complex has undergone multiple changes throughout the phases, pre, during, and post of World War II. These alterations, caused by strikes targeting wage imbalances, racial discrimination, and governmental involvement, changed the industrial philosophy. Employers now cooperate with their employees, which causes an inclination in business as well as a more suitable work atmosphere to work in. From this, industries now have the philosophy to better the environment, government, and their employees. Although both employer and employee may be benefiting off one another, can too much business and mass production lead to affairs, communal, national, or foreign,